We've been talking about the Chinatown International District, which is a term of a place that you guys have heard all morning. But there is another way that this place has been described, and it is the International Special Review District. And so when we formalized this panel, it was thinking about this place that we know as a neighborhood, a living, breathing kind of spaces that people move through. But as most of you know, in historic preservation, there's also a very regulatory and policy-driven aspect to the places that we call home. And so I'm pleased to introduce the panel, What's So Special About Seattle's International Special Review District, or ISRD, Collaborative Efforts in Preserving Neighborhoods. And so we're joined today with our moderator, Eugenia Wu, Director of Preservation Services of Historic Seattle. Also on our Forum Planning Committee, so glad to have Eugenia. We're especially esteemed to join with Tanya Wu, City of Seattle Councilmember and former ISRD Commissioner and owner of the historic Louisa Hotel Apartments. For those of you who are not joining us on the Bainbridge Island tour and instead joining us on the Chinatown International District tour, we'll be stopping by the Louisa Hotel. And we also have Rebecca Frestedt with the ISRD and Columbia City Landmarks District Coordinator of the City of Seattle's Department of Neighborhoods. And if we're lucky, we might have Sokha Dan also joining us, who is the Chinatown International District Community Capacity Advisor, also with the City of Seattle's Department of Neighborhoods, but also owner of Mom's Bookstore, which is a Chinese-Cambodian local-owned bookstore here in the Chinatown International District and the venue of our History-Yoke event tomorrow night. So let's give a preemptive applause for Sokha's work. And so with that, I'll pass it to Eugenia to have first remarks.
So hi, I'm Eugenia Wu, Director of Preservation Services at Historic Seattle, and I'll be the moderator for this session. And I'm thrilled to be here today, and it's been some great sessions today. I hope you all agree. I've been enjoying them. So I wanted to sort of talk to you about sort of Historic Seattle's role, very generally in the city, but more focused on here in the International Special Review District, or ISRD. I may use ISRD and Chinatown International District, CID, interchangeably. And I will only say International Special Review District this one more time because it's quite the mouthful. So anyway, so essentially my job at Historic Seattle is I lead preservation advocacy efforts on behalf of the organization and support the efforts of individuals and community groups to advocate for the preservation of historic places. I have a great colleague, Jeff Murdoch, who is our preservation advocacy manager, and we tag team a lot of these efforts in Seattle and sometimes outside of Seattle, but usually within King County. Here we go. Great. So Historic Seattle was established in 1973, the same year that the ISRD was formed. And we came of age really during, when there was a lot of urban renewal, the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And you'll see that, Pioneer Square, Pike Place Market, and the ISRD were all designated as local historic districts and National Register historic districts, all within like a few years within the late 60s and early 70s. It was a time of urban renewal. There was a lot of activism all throughout the country regarding a lot of things. And it was because of this activism and our predecessors and all their amazing work that we really have these 3 districts in particular in downtown that are still here. Seattle would be a very different place if we didn't have them. And we're really happy that we have them as local historic districts for protection of not only our architectural history, but our cultural history, especially in this neighborhood. Historic Seattle, we focus on 3 main program areas: education, advocacy, and real estate. And so education, we have a year-long community programs, architectural tours, cultural tours, events and lectures and talks, and a lot of great programs that are usually either free or very affordable and accessible. Advocacy is my focus, and I'll be talking to you more specifically about some of the efforts here. And then also real estate. So we are probably more unique in that aspect in terms of preservation groups around the country. So we are real estate developers, and we currently own 10 historic properties throughout Seattle. And over the decades, we've been around for 51 years now. We've saved over 40 properties. Sometimes we'll acquire a property that's threatened, we'll save it, we'll rehabilitate it, restore it, and we'll put it back into the community as a use that benefits the community. And sometimes we hold on to the properties, other times we sell them, and then we reinvest the funding, the money from the sale into operating our current properties, and also potentially buying future, more property. It's getting harder and harder to do that in Seattle and King County and Washington, just because of the property values have just really gone up over the years. But generally, that's what we do. Sometimes we place preservation easements on them and as protection before we sell. So even though we no longer own the properties, we continue to be stewards through preservation easements, which is a very strong legal tool to protect properties. Why is there we go. So interestingly, our first real estate project was in 1974, just a year after we formed. It was the old Main Street School Annex. She was the Annex building, which is across from the Panama Hotel. It was built in 1903, and the original Main Street School, which was older, was just next to this, and that was torn down. But this one was I believe the first kindergarten in Seattle was in this building, and so the building was threatened with demolition, and so we purchased it. I don't know how much, but you've imagined back in 1974, real estate wasn't the same. We stabilized the structure and found a new owner the following year. We placed a preservation easement on it to protect the property, and it's part of our portfolio of about 23 preservation easements that we monitor every year or so and that we steward, but that we do not own. And in the 1980s, I forgot to include a slide here, but we also saved the Victorian Row Apartments, which is in Little Saigon on the other side of the freeway. And it's one of the oldest apartment buildings in Seattle. And it's low-income housing as well, one of our earliest projects as well. Hi, is this? Okay. And so over the years, we've been involved with various advocacy efforts. In more recent years, we've been working closely with the community to save the Busch Garden Restaurant and Lounge, which is a legacy business, which has been a legacy business since the 1950s. A developer purchased the building where it was located, but for demolition and displaced the business. So unfortunately, there was a huge community engagement effort, providing a lot of public comment and engagement with the International ISRD board. And that happened before the pandemic. Things slowed down during the pandemic. We were trying to save the building, save the business. But unfortunately, the business is moved out. But the good news is that the owner of the business will be reopening Busch Garden in a new building. And so that will continue in its new life. But the building, what's going to happen to it, has been vacant for years now, and we don't know what its future is. The proposal was to tear it down and replace it with a 17-story apartment building. The owner also owns the building to the left there. So that's still to be determined. A property that many of you are probably familiar with, the Panama Hotel. If not, definitely encourage you to go see it. There's a wonderful tea house that's there. This is a very important building. It's a National Historic Landmark, and it's in the historic district. It's the most intact building that I know of in Seattle, really on the exterior and interior, really significant for its association with Japanese American heritage, and also designed by Saburo Zaza, who's a Japanese American architect. There's a bathhouse, a Sento in the basement, and in the storage areas of the basement are the luggage and clothing and belongings, personal belongings of Japanese Americans who they stored them there thinking that they would come back after the war. And so after they were put in the concentration camps, and so the internment camps, and so the law, the property, some of the owners came back and took their belongings back, and others were just sort of left there. So the property is protected by on the exterior as part of the International Special Review District. However, the interior is not, and so we worked with the owner, Jan Johnson, to get it landmarked. So we actually, the Landmarks Preservation Board actually designated the entire interior as well as the exterior. Inniscape, what's known as Inniscape Arts Center, was the former U.S. Immigration and Assay Office. It's on the edge of the district. It was also known as the INS building. And this is in the district, but also only the exterior is protected. There are some covenants that GSA placed on it before they sold it to a private developer. So some of the interior is protected. But we worked with Friends of Innscape to do a landmark nomination for it, just so that it would have sort of this added layer of protection. A landmarking does not protect use, however. So the owner does plan to sell it at some point. We don't know when. And so there are concerns about what's going to happen to the property afterwards. So just in addition to some of these project-specific, building-specific efforts, we also engage in community planning and worked with a lot of different groups and individuals on policies related to city planning, development pressure, and large projects. And we couldn't do this work without the community, from historic property owners to the nonprofit organizations to small business owners, and of course the city. And it's a takes the village kind of thing, and this collaborative effort to kind of help keep this district alive, which is a pretty amazing and special place. So thank you. There's my contact info. I'm always available to talk to you about if you have questions. And I'm going to turn over to our wonderful speakers. And I believe first Rebecca and Sokha, you're going to come up together and you're going to kind of tag team a little bit.
So Sokha and I both work with the City of Seattle Department of Neighborhoods, and I'm Rebecca Frestedt. As was mentioned, I coordinate the International Special Review District, which is one of 8 historic districts within the City of Seattle, and I work with the Historic Preservation Program. And Sokha will introduce himself, take you through the first couple slides, and then we'll trade off.
Thanks again. Let me see if I can figure this out, actually. Yeah, so as Rebecca said, we both work for the City of Seattle Department of Neighborhoods. My name is yes, y'all probably International. I see some familiar faces in the audience, so let's say hi. Glad to be here. Next slide. First and foremost, City of Neighborhoods. What is the Department of Neighborhoods? We're really about creating authentic relationships in the Department of Neighborhoods is one of 26 city departments in the city of Seattle. As you can see here, I just listed a brief list of programs that we have under our wheelhouse. We have Community Grants Program, Neighborhood Matching Fund. Since 1988, we've released $64 million in funding to community-generated ideas that has to do with neighborhood improvement, projects developed for and by the community. We have an extensive community liaison program, modeled after a trusted advocate program found in other municipalities. That's all about connecting community leaders to city government. Community engagement coordinators. Actually, in the CID here, we have someone who works in Central Seattle, who is really the lay person within the Department of Neighborhood in the City of Seattle to connect it to resources. They attend things like community meetings, public safety meetings, etc. Historic preservation, which my colleague Rebecca is here to talk about too as well. So I won't dive deep into that. We have a beautiful pea patch community garden. Where in an urban city like Seattle, folks in the community can get away from the city for just a little bit and plant, get involved in urban forestry, and just grow tomatoes for dinner. We have a civic engagement program, which is all about connecting local community members to your local representatives and learning about how to advocate within the system. And last but not least, we have a community capacity building program, which I'm a part of. It's all about really how do you strengthen the community to have capacity to do the work that they know how to do, and have the city as really as a co-partner, co-steward of really community doing what they know best, which is leading. Next slide. So how many of y'all been in Seattle before? Seattle Chinatown ID? Show of hands. Wow. Okay, I'll stop it there then. But welcome to Seattle Chinatown International District. You know, this community is really historically significant. I'm sure you'll have the chance to visit the number of historical sites and really learn about why this neighborhood is so special. The city of Seattle recognizes why this neighborhood is so unique, and also wants to acknowledge that this community has experienced decades of insufficient investment, harmful public policies, and institutionalized racism. I had to get the okay for that, y'all. I got the okay for that. In recent years, the community has faced new community development pressures, the devastating impacts of COVID-19, the rise of anti-Asian hate. As all of you in the room know, in 2023, thanks to work of Hugh, Historic South Downtown, and many others in the room, the National Trust for Historic Preservation named the CID to its list of, and this is something we don't want to be recognized for, but it's important, to the list of America's 11 most endangered historic places. City harmful impact of government policies and projects in the CID. With this acknowledgement, I'd like to on to my colleague Rebecca to talk more about her work and how the work she helps shape and oversee with the International Special Review District Board is helping to preserve the neighborhood.
Thank you, Sokha. Great thing about working with the Department of Neighborhoods is that there are several of us who do work in the CID that Sokha will touch on, and it's a real collaborative effort along with members of the community, and there are many of you here in the room. So I'm going the wrong direction, apparently. All right, so I'm going to talk about specifically my work with the International Special Review District. And much like this session is named, you know, what makes the International Special Review District, I think just being here and being in the presence of the community, you're already feeling a lot of what makes it special. But I'm going to talk about the items that were talked about kind of throughout the course of the day, the history and the spaces that make up the International Special Review District, and the structure for those of you who are doing kind of that deep regulatory work, or just even bypassing it through your work in community-based organizations, cultural organizations, just learning a little bit more about how that process is run within the city of Seattle. So as Representative Santos described at the plenary this morning, you know, the neighborhood has really grown out of Pan-Asian. I think this is going in and out a bit. So if you have difficulty hearing me, I'll continue, but if I need to switch up, let me know. But made up of members of the Chinese, Vietnamese, Filipino, Japanese Americans, as well as our African American part of the Jazz Trail and legacy of that community here in the neighborhood. As was referenced by Eugenia, the district, the historic district, which is the same boundaries as the neighborhood now, was established in 1973 by city ordinance. So city council passed legislation to create an overlay within the land use code that, in addition to the underlying development standards within the code that dictate what kind of, you know, how tall a building can be, what kind of uses there can be within the neighborhood, the overlay provides some additional criteria that must be adhered to within the boundaries of this district. And the designation really grew, and I think this is a really important piece of this story, from activism within the community. There were a lot of concerns about gradual erosion and encroachment upon the neighborhood from the construction of the Kingdom, which was, I'll have a picture of it in a bit, the stadium that predated the football and the baseball stadia that are there today. And there were also concerns about loss of affordable housing. Around the time that the district was established, the preservation movement was also getting underway nationwide. And this is one of the earlier historic districts, as I understand it, to be established. Pictured on top is a picture of a very young Uncle Bob Santos with other community activists who are leading the charge to raise awareness about concerns about loss of affordable housing. And that still is relevant today. So I'm going to move a little more quickly. The map below, I won't go into a lot of great detail, but it shows different zoning overlays as well as the boundary of the National Register District, which is shown in the hashed lines. The dotted lines around that relate to additional requirements because that's the historic core of the neighborhood, but the entire district is the historic district. So moving on, hopefully. So I think I've spoken to some of this already. Within the boundaries of the historic district, the regulations apply to any changes to the exterior of a building or a site, and that includes public and privately owned space. So the city parks department has to come before the historic review board and get approval for changes, as does the Department of Transportation. City Light, when they're making utility pole changes, need to come before the board. And so it's a pretty extensive purview that the board and the Department of Neighborhoods has over changes within this area. But one of the things that is not as common in a lot of historic districts is that the board also has jurisdiction over use. And so as an underlying principal use of a space changes, that requires approval from the board as well. And that is, I think, really intended to help. It was written into the code to help preserve the small business environment and the types of uses that historically make up this neighborhood. And so when there are departures from that, that requires some additional review from the board. So as role of the coordinator, in my role as the coordinator, I oversee the volunteer board, a 7-member board that reviews changes within the district. And I also work to help business owners, property owners, community organizations navigate through the review and approval process. I'm kind of a conduit for information between the two, and to help people understand what kinds of changes are possible or may require some additional considerations. The board itself is made up of members of the community, and I think that's one of the other things that is somewhat specific to this historic district compared to even others within Seattle. Many of the boards and commissions are appointed by the mayor's office or city council. And in this case, 5 of our 7 members are actually elected by the community, members nominated by the community, and only community members can register to vote to select who is going to represent them on the board. And so I think that's one of the things that is pretty special about this neighborhood. And then there are 2 seats that are reserved for architects to bring that technical experience to the board, considering the kinds of work that they do. So you might ask, well, how does the board make decisions about what kind of changes are appropriate in the district or not? And so there are 3 main areas, and one is that underlying land use code. There's a chapter in our land use code that's specific to this district that talks about what kinds of changes need approval, what a complete application entails, the really feisty stuff. And then also what kinds of changes, there's some prescriptive language about materials, proportions of storefronts, things of that nature. But there's a lot that's not in the code, and that's where our design guidelines come in. And they give some additional criteria and guidance for changes within the boundaries of the neighborhood. Now, those guidelines haven't been updated in over 20 years. And so the board has been in the process of working with the community to expand those guidelines to create criteria or more specific guidance for new construction, given the the development pressures that are coming upon this neighborhood and the city of Seattle at large, as well as more location-specific guidance, recognizing that the difference in Little Saigon, the building typologies, block type, and so on are very different from that here in the core of the neighborhood. So I had referenced the Kingdom. Just quickly say that's it on the left with the neighborhood just east of that. So that building was demolished in 2000 and replaced by, well, I'll find the pointer, but the two stadiums that are there now. So you can see that they're still in close proximity. And then there's been a lot of discussion today about the impacts of infrastructure, such as the creation of I-5, which really bisected and irreversibly transformed this neighborhood. And so, you know, even efforts to try to beautify the area, if you can call that beautification. I mean, it is. Murals are important and really nice, but there's still having an overpass cut through the neighborhood leaves a lot to be desired and creates all kinds of other challenges for the community in terms of safety and whatnot. So the next series of slides are really photos just to give some additional examples of the kind of work that has been done to preserve buildings in the neighborhood. This morning when we attended the plenary and checked in, it was at the Changhua Benevolent Association, which was constructed in 1929. And the Chinese language school is housed there. The Great Hall hosts many important events. The Chinese drill team works and practices out of Great Changhua, and I think that they've done a great job of being stewards of that building and maintaining that important place in the neighborhood. Next, we have the Publix Hotel, which is on 5th, across from Union Station. This building had been operating as a hotel for many decades and then became vacant and was vacant for quite some time. And then the Moriguchi family, who owns Wajimaya, purchased this building and painstakingly worked with the National Park Service and the city of Seattle to renovate the building, bring it back to life as apartment units, and also developed an addition, a new addition to the south of the building. And all of that went through historic review with the board and also review by the State Office of Archaeology and Historic Preservation because of the tax credit application. One thing that I'll point out real quick that I've always appreciated is the effort to even replicate the historic canopy, which had deteriorated so much. There were pigeons living inside. They created a mold and rebuilt the entire canopy. And I think it really honors its original form, but is now home to businesses like Hood Famous, which if you haven't been, I'd highly recommend going. Great, I think 3rd place for the neighborhood. And it's just come alive again, and I think is a great asset to the neighborhood. I won't spend a lot of time on the Panama since that has come up in a couple other sessions, and I mean, it's a very important building, and if you haven't been there yet, I would really encourage you to visit. But the NP Hotel, which is just adjacent to it, shown in both the historic and the current photo, I think have been really wonderful examples of buildings that continue to evoke that history and legacy of the community. One kind of fun fact is that if you walk by 7th Avenue South, right across the street, well, actually a block down, and just off of King Street, you're going to pass by the Chinese Community Bulletin Board, and that is on the Louisa Hotel on the east side of the building, which is Tanya's family's building. And it is not only on a designated, not only on a contributing building, but it's also an individually designated landmark, the bulletin board itself. And it's not really what it looks like that we regulate or preserve, but just that function is maintained. And I think it speaks to, ways to honor and recognize the culture of a space because of all the multi-language posters and messages that are still posted there today. And then my time is up, so I'll just show you some additional photos. I wanted to just capture more of an essence of the neighborhood as you're coming through on tours or walking through on your own. I encourage you to explore the historic alleys. I think looking at Little Saigon and the context of how it differs relates so well to the presentation we had just before this and the great research done there about what does it mean to preserve and protect places that don't have historic architectural integrity. And then there is a tremendous amount of amazing cultural placemaking underway in the neighborhood, from multilingual translated street name signs to artwork and murals that represent the community, pavement decals. These are all things that have come before the Historic Review Board that I think really invite people to come and explore. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sokha. Thank you.
Thank you to my colleague, Becca, for just that wonderful sharing of her work with ISRD. Just a little background on myself. I've been working in this neighborhood for the past 10 years. I've known both Tanya and Rebecca for the past 10 years plus. So when you start a job in this neighborhood, you're here for life. Just FYI. But I also own the first Asian American bookstore here in the Pacific Northwest. Mom's Books, check it out. Right here in the CID as well. I'm lucky enough to be working for the City of Seattle's Department of Neighborhoods, where my focus is actually the Chinatown International District. I'll try to talk to Mike. This neighborhood, it's a very special neighborhood, but also it's not a coincidence that it exists. It's because of aunties and uncles and advocates and people like yourself really protecting and fighting for this neighborhood. Part of this fight is really much alive with the CID Vision Advisory Group, which is most of the time, most of the day, 9 to 5, which my life consumes. But the CID, Chinatown International District Vision Advisory Group, is a coalition of 16 member organizations based here in the CID, really saying, hey, we're the community and we should have self-determination about what our community is and should and look like into the future for the next 100 years plus. So it's an interesting story, but the CID Vision Advisory Group came about, and some folks in this room know what happened because you were in these very meetings in 2017. But the city got a bunch of EDs, community-based organizations, the leaders, the top dogs, and put them on a room and said, hey, there's 70-something plus projects happening to your community. Oh, that didn't go so well. And there was this process that, I think the city was trying to do our best to facilitate conversation. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out the way we thought it would pan out. I wasn't involved during that time. Just working here in this neighborhood. But long behold, in 2019, officially, this group of 16 member organizations got together and called themselves the CID Vision Advisory Group, seeing a need for a shared community vision and neighborhood plan. This group of leaders successfully advocated for seed funding and sponsored community-led visioning process to really reflect the diversity of the community and the complexity of the CID. This is a unified neighborhood, but there's also many different opinions and perspectives, and I think we can live with both, that duality. Part of this, I don't have a lot of time, but part of this process is really building a structure for inclusive community engagement and decision-making, ensuring community self-determination in projects that impact the CID, and lastly, creating a long-term community vision and plan. The CID Vision Advisory Group, with their wisdom, has split themselves into 5 really subcommittees. Housing, ensuring that housing is available for both long-time and existing residents. Business and economic strength. I'm sure you'll be able to visit, these small businesses, patronize small businesses, but they are really the backbone of this business. I myself, as a small business owner, would have not been able to open up a small business anywhere but here in the CID. Neighborhood character and culture, which really fits in line with the work that Rebecca is doing with the International Special Review District Board. And obviously, community health and safety. What does it mean to have a safe and healthy neighborhood, public safety versus community safety, et cetera? And transportation mobility. What does it mean to have a community where elders, uncles, folks across generations can really be mobile and use the same services in this community? The CID Vision Advisory Group is comprised of all these organizations. I'm sure you'll have a chance to visit at least one or two of them or a couple of them. But these are the brilliant organizations really saving and protecting the neighborhood. And the CID Vision Advisory Group is also looking to expand this advisory group as well. Felix from Friends of Little Saigons called me right now. Just FYI. The work continues. Here is a sweet picture of Rebecca, Laura, and I in Hing Park. If you guys haven't had a chance to visit Hing Park. The CID Vision Advisory Group, I think for me, I think in this row, it's been, I think, the challenge of really figuring out how to really be a good partner with the community leading the visioning. Our director, Jennifer Chow, who she's pictured here, this has said in a quote, "This community-led visioning process is pivotal to how the city is building trust in BIPOC communities like the Chinatown International District. Our job alongside Mayor Harrell is to invest in community's vision for transformational change." Part of the work I do is really focused on like long-term systemic issues and problems. So I'm thinking long-term, how does the city coordinate internally? How do we have, how do city departments talk to one another? And really where this group is right now is they've created a neighborhood plan. And the go is really, how does this document, this planning that this community has created, not just lay on the shelves, and how does government become accountable partners in really actualizing and implementing this neighborhood plan and visioning? That's time's up. Anyways, I appreciate your times. Let me know if you have any questions. I think we're gonna have a bit of a Q&A too as well. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tanya Wu. I am your Seattle City Council member. I represent citywide. But before I was a city council member, I was one of you, working really hard to preserve the Chinatown International District. So I served on the ISRD. I was on the mayor's advisory group, a failed advisory group. It was my very first time being in the committee representing the Chinatown International District. And basically everybody determined like, we're tired of the city coming to us and asking us what we want and then doing nothing. And so I think the ask was to have an official group of consultants put together a neighborhood plan that eventually turned to the CID Visioning Group. But basically, I put together a video that kind of tells the story of the Louisa, and then at the end of the video, I'm going to tie it all in with how ISRD, how the city kind of put together to try to fight gentrification displacement. So every single building here in the Chinatown International District has a very similar story. So I timed this video to be 10 minutes so I know when to stop talking because I could talk all day about Louisa Hotel. But basically, this was a place during segregation and redlining where Blacks and whites and Asians could all gather and not fear racism, not fear attacks or harm. It's just a safe spot for a lot of community members. And that's why this place is so very important to preserve our stories, basically. We've talked about gentrification, displacement with the freeway, the stadiums, and I'm sure you heard that Chinatown has moved 3 times. This is our final location. And yet still, city and county are still trying to take away our space, basically. There's talks about Sound Transit earlier where they wanted on 5th and take away 3 blocks of the CID. But communities push back. And so before I was a city council person, I got my start developing grit, developing that fight in historical preservation, trying to preserve a building because it is difficult. And without all the safeguards in place with the ISRD committee, with Rebecca made us go out there and pick up all the brick that had fallen during the fire and during the firefighting efforts. And I still have that brick in my backyard. But without those safeguards in place of the RCW that kind of preserves the characteristics of this neighborhood, we would not have been able to keep things like the brick or the woodwork, because things that are essential parts of the building that tell our story, that tell what our ancestors have been through, would have been lost. Because as you know, preserving these buildings costs 3 times more than building new. So it's really a labor of love, and it's dedication that it takes to preserve and keep that legacy alive. And so basically, the day after the fire, we encountered a lot of difficulties. Of course, we were a small family. We did not have the money or the means to be able to get the millions of dollars it takes to rebuild. So basically, you know, my late uncle, he was like, I have a great idea. Let's turn it into a parking lot. Of course, we cannot do that because this area has to get a change of use, you had to get approval. And one of the unapproved uses is a parking lot. So we had to save the building, which is one of the great things about having the ISRD board, looking at use, looking at what can be preserved. When we take a tour this Saturday, there's a lot of focus on the brick, but that brick wall was in danger of collapsing on our neighbors, and we had to stabilize it. So we knew we couldn't save it. But of course, you know, new brick does not look like the same as old brick. But through a very steady process with Rebecca, Eugenia, and Nick Van, with the city and state efforts, we had a lot of mock-up of bricks. It took months where we were tumbling new bricks, so like they're old, trying to match the bricks. There's continuity. And of course, we utilized tax credits, which were very helpful with being able to rebuild. So we had about, I think, $3 to $6 million in tax credits from the half of the building that we were able to save. And in the parts where we're not able to save because of fire, we were able to replicate, which was pretty amazing. Like if walking through the halls of any of our old buildings, it's thinking like if the wall could tell tales. And during the whole demolition process you see here, we were discovering secret passageways. We were discovering trinkets and coins and letters and pictures. It was quite amazing. We kept everything, calendars, and then being able to come in and build and really save that space and turn it into workforce apartments, which is only charges people a percentage of their income, so people are not forced to pay rent they cannot afford. Like not having to charge market rate, especially in this community, is really important to keep those, to keep that really rents really low. Seattle has an interesting thing where we want to build more housing, but we hate landlords. So it's an interesting dynamic. But the whole point of it is that the IRSD board, especially working with Rebecca, I mean, people see it sometimes as a little bit of a, you know, you have to get your all ducks in a row. You have to plan ahead and submit your paperwork and wait to hear back. But really that process helps preserve and safeguard our neighborhood. Really, when new buildings come in, like Uncle Bob's place, there is a well thought out plan that was put together a couple of years ago. I forgot what committee that was in, where it really recognizes things like if you go to Little Saigon, it used to be the warehouse district, and the colors is very important. The yellows represent what Little Saigon, the feeling of being in Saigon and across overseas. The murals in this building also symbolizes when the immigrants came here to live here and work here, symbolizes home for them and made them feel closer to their families. And so all this tells a story, and the importance of preserving this, and especially of fighting gentrification and displacement, with so many high impact development coming around the Chinatown International District. So a lot of things that I look at as a city council person, and I hope, you know, representation really matters. I hope many of you here and recruiting will want to run for office, because things like zoning is really important in terms of having luxury apartments coming in and take property that could be used for services for our community. Right now, unreinforced masonry is a huge issue because we want to be able to upgrade our buildings to be earthquake safe and sprinkler and fire safe, but yet many of these families are not able to have the funds to upgrade their buildings, and we're afraid of a mass sellout. And so how do we mindfully go about that? By helping building owners, by looking at like maybe a unified plan, which could be applied to many of our buildings here. Things like, you know, Seattle is known for its green building initiatives. So how do we make sure we're doing it equitably? Such as a lot of restaurants use gas, and we're trying to go from gas to electric, but we need that high heat to get our food. And so how do we help these buildings be able to go into the next century and next generation, especially in the city? And so that's a lot of things I've encountered so far, working with many city agencies. And also when the building caught on fire, it was just amazing, the outpouring of support from Historic Seattle, from people who've done this before me, Margucci, who helped with the Publix. Like, all the advice we had gotten was just amazing. The community really came through for us, and we felt that hope. We were afraid we'd have to sell, but we decided that we were going to try and do this. And, go down trying was what we kept saying. We're going to go down kicking and screaming, but we're going to give it a try. And, it can be done. And many of us are a testament of that. And so I want to thank you all for being here, for all your work in historical preservation and your fight. I think this is the good fight in telling our stories to younger generations so we can learn these lessons and pass on that we have to learn from this redlining, segregation, that we have to learn from our ancestors. And we talk about the Wami Club. It's a really dark spot in our community, and it's really we're still traumatized and we're still healing. But I think we have to talk about, to learn from the mistakes that were made during that investigation with the city and move forward and be able to work together to be able to save the Chinatown International District and many of the neighborhoods throughout the city who are dealing with very similar situations.
Thank you, Councilmember Wu. And then thank you, Rebecca and Sokha. So we have a few minutes left for a couple questions, and we can open it up to audience questions, and I could bring the microphone to you. I think there are a couple microphones here for the speakers as well. Any questions? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you all. I apologize if this is a super basic question, but I was wondering if you could speak to the origins of sort of the name with the ISRD, and then also talk a little bit about it sort of being perhaps more commonly known as the Chinatown International District. If you could help me understand that.
That is a big question. Anyone who knows the neighborhood well knows that is a big question. So I started working with the district in 2006, and this is a question that comes up and has come up the entire time that I've been working there, and it's not an easy one to answer. Actually, in preparation for this, I was reading through some historic information, and I think it was in the I don't remember the era. It was several decades ago that a public official suggested the name International District to recognize that Pan-Asian history. However, I think that has been a great concern for several stakeholders in the neighborhood who feel that erases the distinct characteristics of Chinatown, Japantown, Little Saigon more specifically. And so I believe there was a kind of a compromise to refer to the Chinatown International District to lead with that history. But there's still disagreement in the community about it today. And even, well, if you look at the light rail station, it's actually International District Chinatown Station, and there's movement to try to correct that. So there are articles written. I think I'll just leave it. Any additions?
I feel like that was really well put. It's complicated. Like Sokha and I was talking about that. Like nowhere else, I think in the US will you see Little Saigon, Chinatown, Little Japantown, Manila Town all in one place because of years legacy of segregation and redlining and racism. And there's still a lot of systemic racism right now when it comes to this community. And in terms of land use and building and permits and how do we build and develop our land basically and saving to fight it. And it's basically what Rebecca said. We wanted to recognize the very distinct neighborhoods, but the city at that time wanted to lump us all into one general term. And it's something that people are really passionate about here in this community. Like you'll ask them what's the name of this district and they'll tell you. And I remember as a little kid, that petition, I had to go out and get 100 signatures to change our name from International District to Chinatown International District, and getting yelled by a lot of people as why. So it's a history of, it's a complicated history. And I think it's basically a story of how us as neighborhood, how do we uniquely define ourselves going forward, and making sure that, a lot of people still call us International District. No, they go by an official name and distinctly knowing the neighborhood, so you're calling out certain areas.
Great, thank you. Those are questions. Okay, Donald.
This is directed towards Tanya. And with a new city council, how can we strengthen the process around landmarking and strengthen historic preservation rules so that the loopholes that developers look for are lessened and the work of preservationists that is more successful instead of stressful?
That's a great question. Thank you. So I always tell people, I don't have very many original ideas. I get my ideas from community and I make it happen, and making sure that I do the community stakeholdering. If you have any specific ideas or anything that comes across the horizon, please let me know. I'll try to implement. I sit on the land use committee, where a lot of things go through, especially when it comes to tree canopy, which is a hot topic, and how do we build and how do we preserve? I am, interestingly enough, the ISRD board goes through my committee, Arts and Culture Committee. I don't know how it landed there. I always thought it would go into land use. But it seems like all these historic preservation and landmarking committees throughout the city are in different committees, which is interesting. I'd be interested in being able to combine them all so that they're more efficient and effective. I would love to hear any ideas you may have.
Thank you. We have another question here.
Hi, I'm Oscar Bell from Next City. I'm sorry to also direct this question to you, Tanya, but I'm interested in the replicability of what you've done. And the first important point of that is, where is the life cycle in the building in terms of income and sustainability? Like, are the rents you're able to pull in now, are they able to cover the operations of the building, taxes, insurance, and everything? Or are there subsidies necessary? And if there are subsidies, how secure are those? Are they federal, state, local, and are they I don't want to say permanent, but reliable, I guess?
Yes, so we wanted to make sure we were building affordable housing. And Seattle has this interesting program called MFTE, the Multifamily Tax Exemption Program, which is, there is a very finite formula. It's a very complicated formula. I'm trying to get my hands on it and try to wrap my head around it. But it's basically allows for lower area median income. For Seattle, the average median income is $120,000. That's the average of how much everyone makes. If you're within 30, 40, 50% AMI, or 80% AMI or under, which means if you make about $90,000 a year under, you're considered middle, low income. And so we wanted to make sure we only charge people according to their incomes levels, which is about 40 to 80. And because the building is older now, we're able to get down to 30. But we experienced the pandemic, which is considered a disaster identification event. And that was really tough, but we were able to make it work. And so when a lot of these buildings come through land use and are saying that, they can only do market rate, they can't afford to do affordable, I say you can make it work. It really depends on IRR, which is the people, I don't know how it's how much you make back on the building for the investors. And so we decided to forego a lower, return to make sure we could do those affordable units. We also, of course, utilized historic tax credits. And I think it was really tough because now I'm hearing throughout the city, a lot of small organizations, community groups have land they want to develop, but they can't because the system does not built for them. They have to make sure they have an owner representative. They have to have all this help they have to hire. They couldn't just do it themselves. And so that's something I'm looking into, because if we were to streamline that and get the cost down so these community groups can develop the buildings themselves and offer affordable housing, I think that's where we want to be.
Great. Well, thank you. Oh, one more question. Cynthia?
Hi. Since 1924, where Hay Park is now, it was Little Manila. But now, since 2019 resolution, Filipino town, just for clarification. So this is directed to Sokha, security, safety and security. Since the death of our beloved Donnie Chin, I noticed one of the groups not on that list was the international, well, the IDEC, International District Emergency Center. Have you considered bringing them into the group to help the safety and security as much as Donnie and his group had done before?
Thank you for that question. Currently, the coalition is comprised of 16 member organizations, and they are working on, building, honestly, on decision making. How does this group with so many diverse opinions admit folks into this coalition? I think the long-term vision is to include as many member organizations as possible. But currently, right now, in specific regards to IDEC, we do have members who are affiliated with IDEC. For instance, Jamie Lee, who serves on the board of IDEC, works for SCIPTA, and she's represented on the board. So currently, right now, there's been no formal engagement, but I think what we're trying to do is to make sure that this cross section of CID leaders also have a holistic view of why this neighborhood is important.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. Well, that wraps up this session. I want to thank our speakers again and thank all of you for attending. And I think, Hui, you have some closing comments?